Hello guys, today we are making a hooded infinity scarf using a free pattern off of the ko.fabrics.com website. You'll need about 1.5 yards of fabric, and today we're primarily going to be using machine, so our instructions will be for machine sewing, but as always you can hand sew this. So I just measured out what I need, and I'm cutting about 3/4 yard of fabric here. You need about 3/4 for the lining and 3/4 for the outside. If you're using the same fabric, you can just get a solid 1.5 yards. And if you're going to cut your hood on the fold, which I will kind of indicate to you here in a little bit, do not do this step. Don't cut your fabric in half again. I'm doing this because I need to sew my hood in half because I have seam allowance on the back side, and sometimes our brains forget things. I'm just laying these pieces flat and I'm going to line them up. And while I do this, it's good to note that the pattern I'm working with on camera is an early iteration of the pattern that is on our site, and we made a few improvements. One of which is we've added seam allowance to the pattern, so you'll see me cut out seam allowance on this pattern and add to the pattern. You do not need to do that when you're making this. The other one is, and I'll show you the edge here on camera right there, is actually going to be cut on the fold, so you don't need to cut that edge out. You can actually fold your fabric over and line that up to the fold. So again, I'm just cutting out with some seam allowance since this pattern does not have it included. Also, the fabric I'm working with today is from Robert Kaufman, and it is our mammoth flannel. Then we are going to mark our darts. So to do that, I'm just going to push some pins through my paper, and then I'm going to make some little dots where my darts end at. And I love using the Crayola washable markers. I've had a really good luck with using those, so I would highly recommend. Here I'm just actually kind of marking this curved seam on the fabric because I found it just a little bit easier to sew if I had a guideline there to know where my point was supposed to be. And then coming in with my ruler and just lining those up and drawing that dart on. And I'm going to do that on all of the pieces of the hood. So if you're doing a lining and an exterior, you should have about 4 darts total to mark. And just making my life a little easier, just cutting in a little bit of a guide there for myself. Alright, so first up you want to sew all of the darts. So we're going to start by pinning our darts on each hood. So I like to just kind of hold at the tip of the pin, at the tip of the point of the dart, and then just kind of push my pin through and make sure that it lines up on the other side. Alright, so I'm going to get my machine here. I use about a 2 length stitch on my machine to 2.5 for this. And then as I follow that line down, I'm going to go down to about a 1 length and back tack just a little bit at the end. And it'll look just like that. And I want to press this out using my iron. I'm using a Robert Kaufman flannel here. It is a cotton flannel, so my iron is on the cotton setting. I'm just going to kind of give that a little press. And then once I've done all my darts, I can sew the top and the back of the hoods together. And I want to do this on both my lining and my exterior hood. And again, if you're using our pattern on our website, the back of the hood, which is this first line I'm pinning together, should already be together and you won't have to deal with that seam. And I do want to note do not sew that little notch there. Only sew the top and the back together. A little bit of back tack, and I'm just going to zip through these seams. So with that done, we are going to sew together the little kind of notched out area of the hood, little back area with those curvy, kind of pointed dart-like things. So I'm going to line up my seams and push my seam allowances to opposite sides so I don't have as much bulk. And to get that lined up, I'm going to grab a pin and I'm going to pin those together. And when I sew this, I'm going to sew starting from one of the kind of pointy darted ends around the curve all the way to the other pointy end. And what this is going to do is box out my hood so I have a really nice shape to the hood. Like that. Alright, so you will need to make a lining if you haven't made one already, so go ahead and do that. My lining is this kind of scrapped together white flannel, so my hood is extra warm. And so I'm going to want to put the right sides of my hoods together. So I want the seams kind of facing the exterior here, and I'm going to line them up and try to get them kind of nice and snug fitted together. And we're going to start with the top of the hood instead of the neck area. So I'm going to pin the top seam, lining up those seam allowances, and then I'm going to pin down that front edge, and I'm going to leave the neck area alone for now. I'm just going to pin all the way along that edge. Alright, and once that is done, I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I want to start sewing about anywhere between a little over 5/6 of an inch to an inch past the edge. And the reason I'm going to do that is to help me connect the infinity scarf part together later on. So we're just going to start a little bit further out here and then sew all the way down the seam. And ignore the fact that my edges are super janky on the white scarf. It was one of my prototypes, so trying to save fabric in my pattern making process here. And again, leave that little edge there and just back tack that. Now my camera stopped filming on me, so I'm going to show you guys understitching here. We are going to understitch towards the lining. So I am stitching just a scant 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, pushing my seam allowance towards the lining so that I get a nice clean fold to that outside hooded edge later on. Alright, so now we are to the neck area. We are going to do the same thing we did with that top edge to the neck. We're going to line up our seams, line up our darts, and line up our edges, and we are just going to pin around the scarf here. Once we are done pinning, I'm going to go over to my machine and we're going to sew this guy down. We will not understitch this one. It is way too hard to do that, but since this one is at your neck, you won't really need to see that crisp line like you will on the upper edge of the hood. Alright, so now I'm going to clip my neck edge so that it sits nice and flat, and I'm just going to kind of notch these in here so that as that curves around my neck, those bulky bits don't get in the way. And then I'm going to trim my seam allowance. I've not really been trimming my seam allowance on any of the other edges because it's not really been an issue, but because this is a neck edge, I wanted to trim it so it was nice and flat. Alright, so now the fun part of pulling this guy inside out. This was, I thought it was going to be really simple, but it kind of got stuck along the way a couple times. And you can kind of see as I go here, I'm just going to run my hand all the way through, grab both sides, and then start kind of working that edge through the scarf. Eventually have to kind of stuff the hood into the tube, and then I'm able to kind of eventually like pull the whole thing out, and voila, there we go, it's a hood. Alright, so go ahead and line up your edges. You will notice that that front edge will fold way nicer than the neck edge will. Give it a little press, so go ahead and iron it. Ironing it will make it sit really nice and flat. And now we are going to attach our two ends of the scarf. So make sure nothing's twisted up. And then pin your outside edge first, folding in your seam allowance on the edges and pinning it. Then we're going to take this over to the machine, and making sure that that lining is out of the way, I'm going to zip that seam shut. Oof, nearly hit my pen, didn't I? Alright, and I'm going to iron that down, and then with the lining, actually, first, I'm going to notch those little edges just so they're kind of out of my way while I'm hand sewing later. Just kind of making life easier for myself. Alright, so one edge I'm just going to kind of finger press down to start with, and the other edge I'm going to fold in my seam allowance. And then fold in my edges. And I'm going to go press this on the ironing board and come back. So I've got that seam allowance folded in, one's flat, one's folded. And you can, if you want to fold both of them, you can. This was just a little bit easier for me to pin and get everything situated. And so I'm going to pin those edges. So I've got about an inch on each side of that seam that I'm going to have to sew shut. And so I'm pinning these together and then going to pin that middle area. So I'm going to hand sew this here in a minute, but if you would like to top stitch this down, you can top stitch it close to the edge of the seam, if that is your preference. It's honestly, I imagine it would be very, not very noticeable to top stitch it. I just wanted to hand sew it, so I did. So grab your hand sewing supplies. A needle and thread is mainly what you need for this, and a thimble if you want to save your fingers. Just cut a length of thread about your arm's length. Thread your needle, and then you're going to wrap that thread around your finger a couple times, roll it off the edge, and make a little knot. And then I'm going to tuck my knot in here into that crease. So I'm going to kind of like fiddle with it a little bit until I get the knot tucked in. And then I am doing just kind of a general whip stitch here. and every so often I'm going to do a knot. Every like 4 or so stitches, 4 or 5 stitches, I will do a little knot. I'm just kind of whip stitching this shut. I'm not being very precise here. It's honestly, I've worn this scarf a lot, and you can't even tell where it is sewn shut at in the infinity scarf because it's going to be at the back of your scarf and not the front of your scarf. So whatever does the trick will work here. And I am going to finish this little top edge first, go down and sew the middle, and then I will sew the bottom edge. And I will just let you enjoy your sewing, hand sewing vibes in peace for a little bit. Hello again. Alright, I hope you guys have enjoyed watching me play string yarn chicken here with my needle as I'm running out of thread and don't want to thread another needle, and I'm sewing with the tiniest amount of thread currently. But with that, our scarf is completed. I hope you had a great time watching this tutorial today, and I hope that you make this scarf in time to wear it on all of your kind of winter walks and strolls. As always, like and subscribe, and visit us at ko.fabrics.com.